I think we'll give it one more minute. Okay, it's noon, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Melissa Rooker. I serve as the Executive Director at the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund. And I welcome all of you to the webinar today to learn a little bit more about the Capital Projects Fund Accelerator Grant Program. As I'm sure many of you know, we at the Children's Cabinet held a special meeting yesterday and made the round 1 awards, but we do have an additional round where the bulk of the funding will be awarded at the February 2nd meeting of the Kansas Children's Cabinet. So because the RFP is open until December 18th, and you all still have an opportunity to work on applications for round 2 funding, we thought we would host a webinar today to review where we are and remind what the criteria of this grant program requires so that we can help ensure that you all have a competitive chance at applying for the funding. So if we can move on to the slide here to define the purpose and really focus in on this aspect of this particular RFP. The funding comes to us from U.S. Treasury. It's an American Rescue Plan source of funding known as the Capital Projects Fund. As originally passed by Congress, this particular strand of funding was specifically earmarked for broadband projects. But then subsequent to the passage of the American Rescue Plan, Congress went back and opened up several other allowable uses of the funding. And so US Treasury adjusted the rules regarding the fund. And that is when we at the Cabinet became interested in crafting a proposal for US Treasury to consider. This all happened in 2021. Our initial proposal was submitted to US Treasury in December of 2021, and it took about 6 months to hear a final decision from Treasury. We went back and forth with them several times, providing clarification. Our proposal looked a lot like many of the unsuccessful proposals from round 1. Our proposal centered childcare centers as meeting the criteria that you see on screen. The new rules require the construction of multi-purpose community facilities that support work, education, and healthcare monitoring. So we positioned childcare at the heart of those 3 purposes. We made the case that by having quality childcare programs available, families with young children could have a safe place for their children and report to work, and more people could re-enter the workforce. We made the case that children are educated in childcare facilities, so the preschool programs and all the early learning opportunities that can be supported in a quality childcare program would meet the education requirements. We also pointed out that workforce development programs targeted to the childcare sector would be a boon across the economy because we have a shortage of childcare providers. And then, of course, we made the case that these facilities could house different forms of developmental and healthcare screening, and you know, you could have a space with some computers set up for telehealth visits if family needed, that sort of thing. We saw a lot of that in the proposals that we received in the first round, and after I get through some overview framing remarks, we'll turn it over to Hannah to talk a little bit more about what we saw. But I can tell you that Treasury reviewed that. They met with us several times, and they came back to us and they said, no, that is not what we mean. What we're looking for are multi-purpose community buildings that house actions that more broadly support work, education, and healthcare monitoring. It took us another 12 or 13 months. We did not get the final approval from US Treasury until late August of 2023. So we spent a lot of time with them working on a lot of iterations of our vision. We did get their permission to require childcare be central to the project awards that we choose as eligible, but all of the other criteria has to be present. It can't be some of, 2 out of 3, or, the more limited version of work, education, and healthcare monitoring. And then there is still a major component where broadband access must be planned into the construction projects for these particular facilities. I won't go through the outcomes on the screen. There's detail in the RFP, but there are defined outcomes that successful applicants will help meet. And so we always keep an eye at the Children's Cabinet on the outcomes that are derived from the investments we make through our grant programs. So we can move to the next slide. Just a quick review. We originally received that there is $38 million available in total for these grant awards. Yesterday we gave 3 awards and it was worth 10.2 million. Hannah we will have a slide with the specifics in a minute, but there's still 28 million roughly available for round 2 awards. So we do have the bulk of the funding still available. As I mentioned, this funding source is US Treasury, originated as broadband funding. The money can only be used for construction of the facilities. There's really no other allowable use. There is a limited form of personnel directly associated with construction that can be funded, but you can't do furniture acquisitions and some of the other staffing. We do not have any available operations funding to serve those purposes. So this is strictly construction expenses. And the design considerations in your project proposal when you apply must enable all of the required components. And Treasury is requiring a plan for sustaining those actions for 5 years beyond the completion of the project. So we're going to have some monitoring to do together to make sure we're in compliance with the terms Treasury set forth. The Treasury is also requiring that you have a demonstrated operational sustainability plan, and we're requiring 15% project match. It can be a combination of cash and real assets with defined value. So in other words, if you have a piece of land or you have an existing building that you own, an official valuation can be considered. We can move to the next slide. Yesterday, we reviewed round 1. We received a total of 12 applications. The total funding requested amounted to 63.1 million. Reminder, we have 38 million to give. Our target for round 1, we decided we wanted to give $10 to $12 million to projects that were qualified applicants in round 1 and preserve 26 to 28 million for round 2. So we can move to the next slide. This is the slate. These 3 projects hit it out of the park. Their proposals met every one of the required elements. Were just really strong applications. You can see that we will, above and beyond the other grant program we have been managing this summer, the Child Care Capacity Accelerator, which created over 4,200 new childcare slots. These 3 programs will add an additional 313 slots to the Kansas childcare landscape. Total funding, like I said, just over 10.2 million. So there is still, we're in the realm, and 2/3 of the money is still yet to be awarded. So we can move to the next slide. This just gives you the visual. We are looking to make sure we have broad reach for these funds. From here, I'm going to invite Hannah to take over the presentation and walk through the criteria, the trends that we saw in round 1 awards, and some ideas for ways you can seek assistance if you're having trouble with how to write to meet all of the criteria. So Hannah, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm very excited to see people that I recognize here. So people that we've already reached out to and facilitated some technical assistance, or maybe previous accelerator awards. So really exciting to see projects and people that we're familiar with. So overall, as Melissa had already said, in general, these were kind of the themes that we found in first round applications and why we weren't able to fund more projects. Again, we had earmarked a smaller portion of the total award amount for those first round applicants, but above and beyond, we just saw the same themes. So and actually, I'm sorry, let me walk you through the review process first. So the review process, we had a multi-reviewer, and our demographic slate of reviewers was really robust. We had representation from, philanthropy, private commerce. We had a representative from a private, pretty large construction company, economic development. I mean, really a bevy of experience, and certainly not just limited to state agency or childcare experience. So the initial review happened with that slate of reviewers, and then that smaller slate was brought to the cabinet staff for internal review. We had to go through and really ensure that they had met all of those components above and beyond just a pretty application. And so we got down to the final 3 for recommendation through that process. And throughout the first round of applications, as many of you know, we provided technical assistance through emails and phone calls and Zooms. And just an overall pretty established line of communication for those of you that I think that were wanting assistance. So certainly something we can do better next time, but those are the established channels that we'll continue to use. So overall, the themes that we saw in round 1, one of the biggest things was just a little too much emphasis on childcare. So this needs to be a multi-purpose community center with a childcare component, but not the focal point. So this is above and beyond just a childcare center. It needs to be a central place where the community is going to seek resources that are, enabling work, education, health monitoring. And we know a lot of those things are done within childcare, like Melissa was saying, but the U.S. Treasury says above and beyond, we need more than that. So that was a major issue that we saw, and I'd really encourage you, even though we know that you have community resources that achieve many of these same things, think beyond your home visiting models that are already within your school. Think beyond those community-based resources that are just limited to childcare. It needs to meet more than just that demographic. So we did see a lot of that where people were incorporating those partners that they were already leaning on, like, your Head Start, your local home visiting model, whoever's coming in to do screeners for Part C, things like that. And that's wonderful, but it has to be beyond just the childcare component. Secondly, we saw kind of a lack of collaboration with the larger community, kind of just leaning into the resources that we know and are familiar with in the childcare and early childhood landscape. But what we're really looking for is, what does your community need totally? So is it a workforce center? Is it people are having a difficult time acquiring, artifacts and documentation that they need to find employment? Like, what are the larger needs of your community? And is that represented in your project, not just the demographic needs of the children you're serving? So I think we would have liked to see a little bit more collaboration. And we're going to give you some specific examples of people that you can reach out to and types of collaboration that you can do. Overall, there was also a lack of detail and specificity. So we are looking for data-driven projects and proposals, and so we encourage you to use data from resources like Child Care Aware, point-in-time data, other data that will evidence why this need is critical to your community. And also, we'd love to see how this need was exacerbated by COVID, because that's another element of this funding opportunity. And we did see some data, but it wasn't necessarily relevant or didn't help paint the full picture in the way that we wanted. So I would just encourage you to find clean information that's easy to understand and helps paint the picture that you want to paint, and articulates the need, the specific need. And then finally, as we've already kind of said, just missing one or more of those elements. So they had to meet all of these components. There was no wiggle room, and these elements had to be outside of the scope of early childhood or childcare. So I'm going to go into some of the specific technical assistance, specific examples of these activities, and a lot of this is pulled directly from guidance documents from the U.S. Treasury. And when you have time, please visit the allinforkansaskids.org, and I'm blocking what that is, but I believe that's our community section. Yeah, communities, and you'll find all of your CPF resources in there. And Carrie, do you mind putting your question in the chat or holding, and I'll come back for general questions unless it's specific to these slides? Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we have a section plan for all the questions. So like I said, a lot of this language is pulled directly from the U.S. Treasury guidance, but enabling work, these are the types of activities that we're looking for. So career counseling services, think about adults that have a difficult time filling out job applications, finding jobs that need applied for to begin with. And then what are some of the barriers that those people encounter? So maybe it's pulling together a resume. Maybe it's finding the legal documents that they need to actually apply for a job. Maybe they don't have their birth certificate or their social security card. These are real barriers that people of a certain demographic face all the time. And these community centers are supposed to be removing those barriers. Also, workforce training programs is another great way. So look in your community and see, are there technical programs that already exist? And think above and beyond childcare, and see if you can integrate that workforce training program into your community center, into your project. Like I said, the facilitation of job search and application, I will tell you, after running reentry in a county jail for a number of years, this is very difficult. Just getting the documents together and having what you need to apply for a job, understanding the process, navigating the system, it's very difficult. And so we're really looking for those community supports that will facilitate people that are already disenfranchised to, achieve. And then just a caveat that we'd like to clarify, the employment of individuals out of the center, so jobs created because of the creation of the project, that does not meet the component for enabling work. So it's enabling work above and beyond employing people and creating employment in your community. Advancing now to health monitoring. This one's a little bit more abstract, but really just think about some of the basic human needs that people, children, and families in your communities are going to encounter. One of the beautiful examples that we saw in the first round funding was out of Emporia, out of Lyon County. So they're going to be leaning on Flint Hills Technical College, which is a dental hygiene school. I'm sorry, it's a technical college, and they also have that program. And one of the difficulties at that school is finding people for those practicum students to actually examine. And it's an access and equity issue, because to be examined at that school, you have to drive there, and it's not necessarily centrally located. So they're partnering to have the dental hygiene students clean the teeth within this community center. And so it's a beautiful marriage of services needed, right, and experience needed for those college students, because they have to have these practicum experiences in order to graduate. So think about existing community resources that are already providing like low or no fee services or sliding scale services. Maybe they're already used to going into a separate location and offering some sort of a medical screening, or just a general, like a physical before school starts for low income kids. Things like that is what we're looking for. But especially lean on technical programs that you have in your community, because they most likely have clinical requirements that they have to meet in order to graduate their students. We also had a really great example of health monitoring come out of Hayes. So for Hayes, the local hospital is already committed to doing community blood drives and wellness campaigns out of that community center. So it's going to be a hub for all things wellness for Hayes, but another great example of what you could do. And then finally, thinking about sustainability, think about even private purveyors of these types of resources. So maybe it's somebody that can offer behavioral health or therapy services, something like that. And they could work out of your building, charge rent, pay rent to the project. And that creates an additional source of revenue that would help keep the project in total sustainable. So think about how you could incorporate existing professionals into your community project that will increase the access for the community that you're serving. That's really key, is bringing resources where they otherwise would not have been available, especially those that have been exacerbated by COVID. Enabling education, and I know we work in early childhood education, so just as a reminder, let's think above and beyond that B5 space. Specifically, let's think about adult education. So are there evening classes that are taking place in your community and they need a location? Is there a need for community classes and childcare? Is that a barrier to education for an adult? Also, digital skills programs for older adults. I love this. We have a really large part of our population that is retiring but still working full time and actively seeking work. And sometimes the technological barriers are very difficult for them to navigate. So think of the senior citizen and those older adults that are still part of your workforce in the community and the supports that they need to still be able to find jobs and find that employment. Virtual learning is another thing, especially if somebody doesn't have a place to go and learn. So that could just be a multi-purpose room that somebody is able to come in and hook up and do their work. And then again, I'd just like to continue to encourage you, if you have higher education in your community, whether that's a community college, a technical college, a 4-year, lean on them and see what they need for their on-site trainings and practicums. We saw a few examples of this in the first round, and it's really a good partnership because they need to have those hands-on hours in order to graduate. Finally, broadband access, and this is kind of a smaller element, but it has to be there. So there are specific requirements about the upload and download speed. You can find those on all of the documents that we have listed on All In for Kansas Kids. They're also on the original U.S. Treasury artifacts. In the case that broadband's not already available in your community, it says that fiber optic infrastructure is preferred. And then if this is not a situation where the community center is offering free broadband or free Wi-Fi access, and this is a community that doesn't already have that broadband access, if it's implementation, it has to be affordable. So I think for the most part, this is not something that we're going to see in these projects. For the most part, what we've seen is a community center with accessible Wi-Fi that meets those speed requirements. So I'm going to actually stay right here and I'm going to open it up for questions. So we have a couple things happening. I would encourage you to use your reactions, raise your hand, and then if you have a question you'd rather type out, go ahead and put it in the chat. We've got people monitoring both. But yeah, happy to take any questions. This is what we're here for. And Diane.
Well, it helps if I get off mute. So thank you for this. This is very, very helpful, and especially in light of the funding announcements that came out yesterday. So, or funding slate, I should say, that were put out yesterday. And I just want to clarify something that I believe you said earlier. You said this is for construction only, not for operations, but what about is furniture included or no?
No.
Okay. And then just a general question. My next general question is, will this PowerPoint/recording be made on the website today, Monday, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, we will upload it as soon as it's done downloading, ironically. So it should be available here in the next few hours.
Awesome. Thank you.
Joshua.
There we go. Can you hear me? Okay. Let's say a facility that with multiple buildings. I guess, could you elaborate a little bit on the definition of facilities? If it's a sort of a complex with multiple structures there, does that constitute a single facility? Yeah, that's my question.
So Hannah, if you don't mind, I'll take this one. So we did have a proposal that was buildings in different towns. That is not okay.
Okay.
If you're talking about a campus, I think we would have to analyze, like on a per project basis, take a look at what's being proposed. And I will be honest, that's probably one that I would turn to get some guidance from our federal project officer to make sure we're within reason. That was some of the vetting that we did as well, was turning to the people we answer to say, would this kind of proposal meet criteria? So where we need to seek that guidance, because it's like a cool plan with multiple buildings, I think the case can be made that it is a single multi-purpose community facility, but I don't want to say broadly that yes, anyone with any form of multi-building project is going to get considered. Like, I think we have to take that case by case, and we will. There was a question about whether renovation can be considered part of the, yes, absolutely. Renovation, a major renovation of an existing building would be allowed. We can't cover other forms of cost beyond the construction of the physical space.
And on that note, just real quick, because it's a great plug, if you have a project that's going to necessitate renovation, I would highly recommend that you collaborate with licensing first, because you might find out that the cost of renovation to comply with licensing is
for childcare.
Maybe, yeah, for childcare, for that childcare component might not be the most viable project. So make sure that you are establishing contact very early on in your project. Crystal, I believe you were next.
Thank you.
So a couple questions. With the mental health screen, dental, that kind of stuff, does it have to be for community members also, or can it just be for the child care attending children?
No, it must. This is a community center
So it has to be available
these
to community,
funds
okay.
are for. You are allowed to operate childcare at a community center we fund with these dollars, but you cannot. We can't fund a project that is employer based and not open to community members for any of the services. So it can't be that exclusive. That is one of the weaknesses that we saw in a number of applications, is that the thinking is not, you're not thinking about these as community centers, you're thinking them as childcare centers. And how do we take the childcare center and expand on services that the kids are receiving or the staff of that center is receiving? These have to be community centers.
Community centers, okay.
Yeah.
Kelsey.
Hi, yes, I just had a question more along the lines of, so like as I'm going through and I'm doing this application, I feel like certain areas of my like that I'm filling out are, stronger than other areas. How important is it that we are able to meet every single criteria? I want to just make sure that there's certain boxes that say that they're worth, additional points or different things like that. But, I'm struggling because I'm hoping that what we would do is something along the lines of providing like training for parents and things like that, but not actually using it as a community center, more of like utilizing the rooms as dual purposes. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's not allowed.
It's not allowed.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
No, you have to hit all of the federal criteria. We have bonus add-on points. Those would be things that are helpful for enhancing your application, but not part of the core requirements.
Okay, that was kind of my question, to make sure that, because I was kind of more struggling with like the health side of it of,
Yeah.
we could provide training on, but I just don't know. It's kind
The,
of hard just to tie them all into one.
well, it is, and that's
If you're
why.
not doing a community center, I mean.
Well, and you have to do a community center.
Okay.
That's, if there's only one takeaway from this webinar, make it that. You
Okay.
have to make this a community center that serves multi-purposes. That is straight out of the federal criteria. So we cannot, that's where the hard line has to be drawn. It's why moving into this RFP, we had $38 million for construction to award. In the previous grant program, the Child Care Capacity Accelerator, we had a total of $40 million to give. Only $20 million was for construction. We ended up giving 52 grant awards with that $40 million. We don't expect to give near as many awards in this program. You saw it in round one. We gave 3. We think, out with the remaining 28 million, 6 to 8 more ish, like give or take. We are not going to find a cast of thousands that are equipped to qualify for it is a rigorous RFP, and it may not be for everybody.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep.
But Kelsey, I would also suggest reach out to partners in your community, see what needs they have. There might very well be somebody that's doing exactly what you're looking for and they just don't have a home. So that's where those community partners come in, because a child care center that is just a child care center is not going to be able to do all these things. You have to have community partners, and you have to have people that are, like, revenue-wise sustainable with or without that child care component. So I have a question in the chat from Katrina. She says, do you have to have architecture plans already drawn up? We've received that first round, we've received varying levels of architectural plans. A competitive application will have some level of that, yes. And a competitive application would probably be working on this project with or without this funding. That's kind of what we've seen. So even if it's just a rudimentary design, that first step, there has to be some acknowledgement of the total lift. Let's see. Diane Hurst, I believe you're next, ma'am.
One more question, and I'm sorry to ask this, keep asking questions. Is there a cap on how much we should ask for? I know you're saying 6 to 8, you've got 28 million to spread around the state. Is there a particular cap we should not exceed in our request?
Yeah, we won't be funding more than $5 million.
That answers my question. Thank you.
That range, there's a range noted in the RFP of 500,000 to 5 million as the range we're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine Harris. Catherine, did you still have a question, ma'am?
She does have a question in the chat as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is playgrounds allowed, Melissa?
I think that's like case dependent, depends on the element of playground that we're talking about. So I think construction costs, yes. I'd like to get to yes on that. Well, we will. That one I think we'll look into, and we need an FAQ document for this program, which we will develop out of the questions that come through this webinar. So, and some of the TA requests. So that will be one that we will answer and post in our FAQs.
There's an additional question in the chat. It says, must the playground be open to the community? So I'm assuming that the playground question is for the child care component, in which case it would not be appropriate for that to be open to, if that's part of the child care program. And I think it goes back to, we'd like to get to yes about playground. So don't have a firm answer there. Sarah, I don't see anything else in the chat.
There was a question from Jody up at the beginning around, and you might have answered this, but can healthcare be mental or behavioral health care?
I think it can, sure.
Yeah, if you look at especially the guidance documents from the U.S. Treasury, but really the same thing is replicated in our documents. It just says they need to be activities that assist in health monitoring. So it could be any version of those. And if what your community needs is behavioral health care, then that would be a wonderful solution for your project. I think probably some old hands, but I want to make sure. Kelsey, do you have your questions answered? And same to Catherine. Okay. I am not seeing any more
Crystal
questions.
just raised a new hand.
Oh,
but
Crystal, go ahead.
Okay, so does it have to have a childcare component in it then?
We are requiring that it
Okay.
has to have a childcare component.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to move on to our timeline. If you think of more questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand again. We still have time. So just as a reminder, our round 2 deadline is December 18th at 5 p.m. Please do not wait too long to get into the Common App for the first time and see if you're eligible. There are some prerequisite questions that you'll need to fill out to even get into the application. So like predeterminations of eligibility. And there's also some things that might be time contingent, like acquiring a UEI that's been registered. So there's very specific steps that are outlined in the artifacts that we have on the All In for Kansas Kids page. Some of those are very time sensitive. So please don't wait until like a week before to get into Common App for the first time. It will cause a barrier for you. The cabinet approval, the meeting for cabinet approval will be February 2nd of 2024. Therefore, the spending timeline will be a little bit after that. We anticipate about March being able to get these funds ready for reimbursement. And again, the funding timeline is through September 2025. And there is a potential for that no cost extension through 6 of 26, depending on the applicant and their performance during the grant cycle. Some other really just relevant things that we're going to be working on in the next couple of weeks. We have an FAQ document that's just about ready to go. We're going to add in what we learned today and then we'll post it. It will live with everything else on the All In for Kids website under communities. We also have just a whole lot of other things that frankly, just given the questions that I've been getting over the last month or so, a lot of these things live here. So there's good links, good templates to help project what your total expenses would be to operate like a childcare center, for example. There's just some really great tools here. So if you get time, go check it out. And then there's also just additional resources for some of the elements that are outside of childcare. There's also a recording for a previous webinar that walks through the very specific step-by-step process of getting through Common App, creating a profile, doing all the things you need to do there. It's very thorough. It lives on the All In for Kansas Kids page, and you're welcome to watch that. So I will continue to be your primary point of contact throughout the duration of this grant cycle. Megan Broha is also on this call. Many of you have interfaced with her. Sarah Gardner is somebody that many of you know. So we'll continue to support you all. If you have questions, please use the TA box on the All In for Kansas Kids website. It will shunt you to the appropriate person, most likely myself. So if you need something, just reach out. We will get back with you. The other thing for those of you that might be first round applicants is that I'll be scheduling time in the next few weeks for those of you who are interested, if you'd like to go over kind of what you could do different to repurpose your application for the second round. Just as a reminder, those first round applicants, you are encouraged to reapply. Like Melissa was saying, there's a finite number of projects that are going to be successful in our state. And so we encourage you to repurpose your application. I'll be reaching out, like I said, and if you and your team are amenable, I'd love to sit down and walk you through how we can modify some stuff. So anybody have any last questions or anything you'd like to clarify before we go? Oh, I have one more question. Katrina in the chat. Can the facility have a daycare in an entrance that's a separate area of the building? Yes, so you'd have to separate your kind of authorized and unauthorized access to your child care center. So all of the same compliances that you need to do for, regulation and just best practice apply here.
Hannah,
And we also
there's
have, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I just want to note one thing for those who might be new to the cabinet's process. All of these grants are reimbursement based as well. So as you're thinking about the size of your ask, you will just keep that in mind. You will submit, if you're funded, you will submit for reimbursement, which means you will have to front the costs of what you're asking to be reimbursed. So I just wanted to note that up front for those who may be new to the cabinet grant processes. And
Yes,
it's driven by our federal best practice and uniform grant guidance. So it's not anyone trying to be extra difficult. It really is funding from the funders.
Yeah. Joshua.
Yeah. With that that last comment, thank you. What is the estimated time of reimbursement?
So our fiscal agent is KSDE, the Kansas State Department of Education, and their reimbursement policy is 30 days.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, that's your answer.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's all we have for you. You all should know how to get a hold of me if you have questions, get a hold of the team if you have questions. Again, there's a TA box on the All In for Kansas Kids community page where if you just have a general question and you don't know who you need to talk to, just fill something out and somebody will get a hold of you. This recording will be posted, as we said, and then there's a lot of other resources that we encourage you to check out. So I'll be in touch with many of you, I'm sure, and thank you very much for spending your noon hour with us. Thank you.